My name is Derek, and I used to work the night shift at a gas station off Route 17 inches rural Pennsylvania. This happened back in 2019, and I still think about it almost every single day. The gas station was one of those old ones, the kind that looks like it hasn't been renovated since the 1980s. Flickering fluorescent lights, a broken coffee machine that nobody ever fixed, and a bathroom that I refused to clean after midnight. My shift ran from 11 p.m. to 7 a.m., and most nights were dead quiet. Maybe 3 or 4 customers the entire night. Truckers mostly, sometimes a lost traveler. It was a Thursday night in October when things got weird. Around 2 a.m., this old sedan pulled up to pump number 3. The car looked ancient, covered in dust and mud, like it had been driving through back roads for hours. A man stepped out. He was tall, maybe 6'2", wearing a long coat that seemed way too heavy for the weather. His face was pale, almost gray under the station lights. He didn't pump any gas. He just stood there, staring at the convenience store window, staring at me. I figured he was confused or maybe having car trouble, so I pressed the intercom button and asked if he needed help. He didn't respond, didn't move, just kept staring with these hollow eyes that seemed to look right through me. After about 5 minutes of this, I started getting uncomfortable. I reached for my phone to maybe call my manager or even the cops, but when I looked back up, the man was gone. His car was still there, engine running, but he had vanished. I watched the security monitors, switching between cameras, trying to find where he went. Nothing. It was like he had dissolved into thin air. Then I heard it. A knock on the back door, the employee entrance that led to the storage room. Nobody ever used that door. It was always locked from the inside, and the only people who had keys were me and my manager. The knocking continued, slow and rhythmic. Knock, knock, knock. I grabbed the baseball bat we kept behind the counter and slowly made my way to the back. My heart was pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. The knocking stopped just as I reached the storage room door. I stood there for what felt like an eternity, bat raised, ready for whatever was on the other side. Then I heard breathing. Heavy, ragged breathing coming from the other side of the door. "Hello?" I called out, my voice shaking. "The store is closed. You need to leave." The breathing stopped. Then a voice, deep and distorted, like someone talking through a broken radio. Salt. "I know you're alone, Derek." I froze. How did he know my name? I wasn't wearing a name tag. I never wore my name tag during night shifts. I backed away from the door slowly, keeping my eyes fixed on it. I pulled out my phone and dialed 911. As the operator answered, the back door handle started rattling violently, like someone was trying to rip it off. 911, what's your emergency? There's someone trying to break into the gas station on Route 17. Please send someone now. The rattling stopped immediately. Complete silence. I stayed on the line with the operator for 15 minutes until a patrol car arrived. The officers searched the entire perimeter, checked the back door, examined the old sedan still sitting at pump 3. Here's the thing that still haunts me. The officers ran the plates on that sedan. It came back registered to a man named Harold Vickers. Harold Vickers had been reported missing 3 weeks earlier. His body was found 2 days after my incident, in the woods about 10 miles from the gas station. He had been dead for at least a month. The coroner's report said he died from exposure, but the car at my station that night was warm, the engine was running, someone had been driving it. I quit that job the next week. I don't drive on Route 17 anymore. And sometimes, late at night, I still hear that Volce in my head. I know you're alone, Derek. This story was told to me by my cousin Marcus, and I have no reason to believe he made any of it up. Marcus is one of the most level-headed people I know, a software engineer who doesn't believe in ghosts, aliens, or anything supernatural. But what happened to him at Blackwood Lake changed him forever. In the summer of 2021, Marcus and 3 of his college buddies decided to rent a cabin in northern Ontario for a week-long fishing trip. The cabin was remote, about a 2-hour drive from the nearest town, accessible only by a dirt road that wound through dense forest. No cell service, no internet, no neighbors for miles. Just them, the lake, and the wilderness. The first 2 days were perfect. They caught fish, drank beer, played cards, and enjoyed being disconnected from the world. It was exactly the escape they needed. On the 3rd night, things started to feel off. Marcus woke up around 3 a.m. to the sound of footsteps on the cabin's wooden porch. Slow, deliberate footsteps, like someone was pacing back and forth. He figured it was one of his friends going out for a smoke, so he tried to go back to sleep. But then he realized something. All 3 of his friends were in the cabin with him. He could hear Jake snoring in the bunk across the room. Tyler and Sam were in the other bedroom. So who was on the porch? Marcus lay there, paralyzed, listening to those footsteps. Back and forth, back and forth. They continued for almost an hour before finally stopping. The next morning, he mentioned it to his friends. They laughed it off, said it was probably a deer or a raccoon. Marcus wanted to believe them, but he knew what he heard. Those were human footsteps. That night, Marcus decided to stay awake. He sat by the window with a flashlight, watching the porch. Around 2 a.m., the footsteps started again. He turned on the flashlight and pointed it at the porch. Nothing. The porch was empty, but the footsteps continued, clear as day, right in front of him. He woke up his friends this time. They all heard it now. 4 grown men standing in the living room, listening to invisible footsteps on the porch. Jake grabbed a hunting knife and threw open the front door. The footsteps stopped. The porch was empty. The forest around them was dead silent. No crickets, no owls, no wind, just absolute silence. Then they saw it. Across the lake, on the opposite shore, there was a figure standing at the water's edge. It was too far to make out details, but it was definitely human-shaped, and it was watching them. Tyler grabbed his binoculars and looked. He went pale immediately. He handed the binoculars to Marcus without saying a word. Marcus looked. The figure was a woman, or at least it had the shape of a woman. She was wearing a white dress that seemed to glow in the moonlight, but her face was wrong. Where her eyes should have been, there were just dark, empty sockets. And she was smiling, a wide, unnatural smile that stretched too far across her face. As Marcus watched, the figure railed one arm and pointed directly at him. They packed up and left that night. They drove for 2 hours in complete silence, not stopping until they reached the nearest town. None of them ever went back to Blackwood Lake. Marcus later did some research on the area. He found an old newspaper article from 1987 about a woman named Eleanor Vance who had drowned in Blackwood Lake. Her body was never recovered. Locals said she had been heartbroken after her fiancé left her and had walked into the lake one night, never to be seen again. The article included a photo of Eleanor. Marcus recognized her immediately. It was the same face he had seen through those binoculars, except in the photo, she had eyes. He printed that article and burned it. He never wanted to see her face again. My name is Sarah, and I live in a suburb outside of Chicago. What I'm about to tell you happened last winter, and I'm still not sure what to make of it. I work as a nurse at a hospital downtown, which means I often get off work late at night. Usually, I take the train home, then walk about 15 minutes from the station to my apartment. I've done this walk hundreds of times. It's a safe neighborhood, well-lit streets, quiet but not deserted. One night in December, I got off the train around midnight after a particularly exhausting shift. It was cold, maybe 20 degrees, and there was a thin layer of snow on the ground. I started my usual walk home, headphones in, music playing, lost in my own thoughts. I was about halfway home when I got this feeling. You know that feeling when someone is watching you, like a prickling sensation on the back of your neck? I turned around and saw a man about 50 feet behind me. He was wearing a dark jacket and jeans, nothing unusual. His face was obscured by a hood. He wasn't doing anything threatening, just walking in the same direction as me. I told myself I was being paranoid. This was a public street. People walk on public streets. I kept walking, but I picked up my pace slightly. A minute later, I looked back again. The man was still there, same distance behind me. Maybe a little closer. I turned down a side street, one that wasn't on my usual route. If he was just a random person walking home, he would keep going straight. I waited at the corner, pretending to check my phone, and watched. He turned down the same street. My heart started racing. I walked faster now, no longer trying to hide my fear. I turned down another street, then another. Each time, he followed. Never running, never calling out, just following at that same steady pace. I was 2 blocks from my apartment when I decided I couldn't lead him to where I lived. I changed direction and headed toward a 24-hour convenience store I knew was nearby. If I could get inside, I would be safe. I could call the police, call someone, anyone. I started running. Behind me, I heard his footsteps speed up. He was running too. I burst through the convenience store door, gasping for breath. The cashier looked up at me, startled. I ran to the counter and told him someone was following me, that I needed to call the police. The cashier looked past me, toward the door. "What are you talking about?" he said. "There's nobody out there." I turned around. The street was empty. The man was gone. The cashier let me stay until the police arrived. They searched the area, but found nothing. No footprints, in the snow except mine. No witnesses, nothing. I thought it was over. I thought maybe I had imagined it, stressed and exhausted from work. I took a cab home that night and tried to forget about it. 3 days later, I came home from work to find an envelope slipped under my apartment door. Inside was a single photograph. It was a picture of me, taken through my living room window, sitting on my couch watching TV. I moved out of that apartment the next week. I stayed with my sister for a month before finding a new place across town. I changed my route to work, changed my phone number, changed everything I could think of. It's been over a year now, and I haven't seen the man again. But sometimes, late at night, I still get that feeling, that prickling sensation on the back of my neck, like someone is watching me. I try not to look. My name is Marcus, and this happened when I was living in a rundown apartment complex in Cleveland, Ohio. I was 23, broke, and desperate for cheap rent. The building was old, built sometime in the 1960s, and most of the units had been vacant for years. When I moved in, the landlord told me there were only 2 other tenants in the entire building. I never saw either of them. For the first 3 months, I lived in complete silence. No footsteps in the hallways, no voices through the thin walls, no signs of life whatsoever. It was like I was the only person in that entire forgotten structure. The hallways were always empty, the stairwells always quiet. I could hear my own dryer rumbling through 3 floors of the building whenever I did laundry. That's how dead silent it was. I didn't mind at first. I worked late shifts at a warehouse across town and came home exhausted. The silence was peaceful. But then things started to change. One night in November, I came home around midnight. As I walked up the stairs to my 3rd floor apartment, I heard something that made me freeze. Footsteps. Coming from the floor above me. Slow, deliberate footsteps, pacing back and forth. I stood there listening for a good 5 minutes. The footsteps continued, never stopping, never changing rhythm, just back and forth, back and forth. I told myself it was probably one of the other tenants I'd never met. Maybe they were insomniacs like me. I went to my apartment and tried to forget about it, but the footsteps became a nightly occurrence. Every single night, around midnight, I would hear them, always from the 4th floor. Always that same slow, rhythmic pacing. I started to get curious. Who was up there? Why did they only walk at night? One evening, I decided to investigate. I climbed the stairs to the 4th floor, something I had never done before. The hallway was dark, only one flickering light at the far end still working. There were 6 apartment doors, all of them closed. I walked slowly, listening for the footsteps. Nothing. Complete silence. I knocked on the 1st door. No answer. I tried the handle. It was unlocked. I pushed it open and found an empty apartment. No furniture, no belongings, thick dust covering everything. It looked like nobody had lived there in years. I checked the next apartment. Same thing. Empty. Abandoned. Dust everywhere. I checked all 6 apartments on that floor. Every single one was vacant. There was nobody living on the 4th floor. There hadn't been anyone living there for a very long time. That night, I lay in bed, wide awake, listening. At exactly midnight, the footsteps started again, right above my head. Back and forth. Back and forth. I couldn't explain it. I tried to rationalize it. Maybe it was pipes. Maybe it was the building settling. Maybe it was rats. But deep down, I knew what footsteps sounded like. And those were footsteps. A week later, I was coming home late again when I saw something that stopped me cold. There was a girl standing at the end of my hallway. She was maybe 19 or 20, wearing a white nightgown, her dark hair hanging over her face. She was just standing there, facing the wall, completely motionless. I called out to her. "Hello? Are you okay?" She didn't respond, didn't move, didn't acknowledge me at all. I took a few steps toward her, and she suddenly turned. But she didn't turn normally. Her body stayed facing the wall while her head rotated toward me at an unnatural angle. I couldn't see her face clearly in the dim light, but I saw her eyes. They were wide open, unblinking, and they seemed to glow faintly in the darkness. I ran. I ran to my apartment, slammed the door, and locked it. I pushed my dresser against the door and sat on my bed, heart pounding, hands shaking. Then I heard it, knocking. Soft at first, then louder. Someone was knocking on my door. I didn't answer. I didn't move. I just sat there, barely breathing. I ran. I ran to my apartment, slammed the door, and locked it. I pushed my dresser against the door and sat on my bed, heart pounding, hands shaking. Then I heard it, knocking. Soft at first, then louder. Someone was knocking on my door. I didn't answer. I didn't move. I just sat there, barely breathing. The knocking stopped, and then I heard something worse. Whispering. Multiple voices, whispering just outside my door. I couldn't make out the words, but there was more than one person out there. More than one voice. I grabbed my phone and dialed 911. I told them someone was trying to break into my apartment. They said they'd send someone. While I waited, I heard the voices moving away. Footsteps going down the hallway, then down the stairs. Then silence. The police arrived 20 minutes later. They searched the entire building. Every floor, every apartment, every stairwell. They found nothing. No girl in a white nightgown. No intruders. No explanation for what I had seen and heard. But here's what really terrified me. One of the officers came back and asked me a strange question. He asked if I knew about the building's history. I said I didn't. He told me that 15 years ago, a young woman had died in that building. She had been living alone on the 4th floor when she fell down the stairs one night. Some people said she fell. Others said she was pushed. Her body wasn't found for 3 days. Her name was Rebecca, and she was 19 years old. She had long dark hair and was wearing a white nightgown when they found her. I moved out the next day. I didn't even take all my stuff. I just grabbed what I could carry and left. I stayed with my brother for 2 months until I found a new place. I've never been back to that building. But sometimes, late at night, I still hear footsteps in my dreams, back and forth. And sometimes, just before I wake up, I see a girl with dark hair standing in the corner of my room, her head turned at an impossible angle, watching me with those wide, unblinking eyes. I'm a long-haul trucker based out of Edmonton, Alberta. I've been driving across Canada and the northern United States for almost 15 years now. I've seen a lot of strange things on the road late at night, but nothing compares to what happened to me on Highway 6 Inches, Saskatchewan 2 winters ago. It was early December, around 2 a.m., and I was hauling a load from Winnipeg to Regina. The temperature had dropped to -30, and the highway was completely deserted. No other vehicles, no rest stops, just miles and miles of frozen prairie stretching out in every direction. The kind of isolation that makes you feel like you're the last person on Earth. I had my radio on, some late-night talk show buzzing in the background, when my headlights caught something on the side of the road. A figure, a man, standing in the snow, waving his arms. Now, I've picked up hitchhikers before. It's not something I do often, but when it's -30 and you see someone stranded, you don't just drive by. That's a death sentence out here, so I pulled over. As I got closer, I could see the man more clearly. He was wearing a heavy winter coat and a fur hat, but something about him looked off. His clothes seemed old, outdated, like something from the 1970s or 82nds, and his face was pale, almost gray, even in the glow of my headlights. I rolled down my window and asked if he needed help. He walked toward my truck slowly, his breath visible in the frozen air. When he reached my window, he looked up at me and smiled. But it wasn't a normal smile. It was too wide, stretching across his face in a way that made my stomach turn. My car broke down about 10 miles back, he said. His voice was strange, flat, like he was reading from a script. Could you give me a ride to the next town? Every instinct in my body was screaming at me to drive away. But I thought about that cold. Nobody survives a night like that without shelter, so I told him to get in. He climbed into the passenger seat, and immediately I noticed the smell. It was faint at first, but it grew stronger. A sour, rotting smell, like meat that had gone bad. I tried to ignore it, Told myself it was probably just his wet clothes or something. We drove in silence for a few minutes. I tried making small talk, asking where he was headed, what happened to his car. He gave short, vague answers. Said he was going to visit family. Said his car just stopped working. Never gave any details. Then he said something that made my blood run cold. You know, I used to drive this road all the time, back in the old days, before the accident. I asked him what accident he was talking about. He turned to look at me, and his eyes were different now. They were darker, deeper, like looking into two empty holes. The accident that killed me, he said. I nearly drove off the road. I gripped the steering wheel and tried to stay calm, telling myself he was just messing with me, some crazy hitchhiker trying to scare me for kicks. That's not funny, man, I said. What are you talking about? He didn't answer. He just kept staring at me with those empty eyes, that too wide smile still frozen on his face. I looked back at the road, my heart pounding. When I glanced over again a few seconds later, he was gone. The passenger seat was empty. But I hadn't stopped. I hadn't even slowed down. There was no way he could have gotten out. I pulled over immediately and searched the entire cab. Nothing. No sign that anyone had ever been in that seat. But the smell lingered. That awful, rotting smell. I didn't sleep that night. I drove straight to Regina and parked at a truck stop with all my lights on, sitting in my cab until the sun came up. The next day, I did some research. I called a friend who lived in that area and asked if there had ever been any accidents on Highway 6. He told me about one. Back in 1983, a man named Gerald Fitch had been driving home from work when his car hit a patch of ice and flipped. He was thrown from the vehicle and died on the side of the road. His body wasn't found until the next morning. My friend said locals had reported seeing a man standing on that stretch of highway for years, always in winter, always late at night, always asking for a ride. Some people picked him up. He would talk to them for a few minutes, and then he would simply vanish from their vehicles. They called him the Phantom of Highway 6. I've driven that route maybe 100 times since then. I always drive a little faster through that stretch. I never stop, no matter what I see on the side of the road. But sometimes, late at night, when I'm alone on the highway and the wind is howling outside, I catch a glimpse of something in my side mirror. A figure standing in the snow, waving its arms. I never look back. It was the kind of weather that unsettles you. A thick fog crawling over the old Alder Creek Bridge as I made my way toward my new home. I had finally bought the small, weather-beaten farmhouse on the outskirts of a town in rural Vermont, desperate for a fresh start. The locals said old Mrs. Caldwell had lived there her entire life. She had passed away months ago, and the house had stood empty until I inherited it from a distant relative. I remember the heavy silence inside the house as I unlocked the rickety front door. As I moved through the cluttered living room with boxes of my belongings, I noticed the peeling wallpaper with faded floral patterns and a fireplace that hadn't been used in decades. The wind howled outside, rattling the windows. At night, the sound of that wind felt like whispers passing through the house. I chalked it up to old wood settling. But on my first night, as I lay in bed waiting for sleep, I heard something fall downstairs. It was a soft crash, like the sound of a small object hitting the hardwood floor. The hallway light flickered as I carefully descended the staircase. I saw nothing amiss at first. It was dark except for the faint moonlight through the curtained window, and every corner seemed to merge into shadows. Then I noticed something on the floor near the fireplace mantel. One of the small porcelain figurines I had placed on a shelf had been knocked to the ground. It lay face down, a crack running along its porcelain cheek. I didn't remember placing it there. My fingers brushed the broken piece nervously, and the hairs on my neck stood on end. I should have thought it was nothing, just a coincidence or bad luck. But we don't have a cat. My mind raced. I reminded myself, I just moved here. New house, new routine. My eyes scanned the living room for another possible cause, maybe a loose shelf or a gust of wind blowing in through a crack. But all windows were closed, and I still hadn't turned on the lights. I could barely see. A soft shuffling sound came from the hallway, as if someone was walking down the corridor. I froze in place, heart pounding. My first instinct was to leave, to run back upstairs and lock myself in. But something compelled me to stay and look. The temperature dropped suddenly, like a cold breath had blown through the room. My breath fogged in the chilly air. I peered into the hallway and saw nothing, just darkness and the gentle sway of curtains. A faint, barely audible whisper, or maybe it was the wind. I squinted, trying to discern any shape, but only the outline of old furniture and a family portrait on the wall met my eyes. In that frame was Mrs. Caldwell and a man I assumed to be her husband, standing side by side on a faraway summer day. He wore an oilskin coat, looking young and smiling as the camera caught him with her. I turned on the flashlight app on my phone and swept it slowly around the room. When the light fell on the front door, I realized it was wide open, even though I'd locked it behind me. My heart thudded. I was certain I had locked the door. It must have blown open from the wind, right? Or maybe not. A chill ran down my spine. I quickly shut the door and double-checked the locks. Safe. I snapped the light off, deciding sleep was more important than ghosts. Sleep, however, eluded me. Every creak and sigh of the house felt amplified. The strange dread in my stomach wouldn't calm. As dawn approached, exhausted, I dozed off in the old armchair by the window rather than in the bedroom. That's when I heard her voice clear as day, not a whisper, but a full sigh, right beside my ear. He's not gone. I jolted awake, breath catching in my throat. My head whipped around, but no one was there. Just me in the early morning light. For a few nights after that, nothing happened at all. I started to think I might be imagining things, that the stress of moving had me on edge. But the day after I heard the voice, I set out on a small hunt for explanations. In the attic, between boxes of dusty linens and old framed pictures, I discovered an old diary belonging to Mrs. Caldwell. Its leather cover was cracked, pages yellowed with age. Inside, she had written about evenings sitting by the window, waiting for him to come home. Her husband had been a fisherman who left early for sea each morning, always promising to return, but he didn't come back one stormy night years ago. She had written how every night after that, she'd gaze out at the raging river and whisper his name into the wind. Reading her words, I felt the house breathe around me as though the very walls exhaled this tragic story. The haunting was not for me. It was her loneliness and grief replaying itself in the empty rooms. That night, I decided to do something unusual. Instead of sleeping inside, I sat on the porch under the stars. The night was silent, except for the distant call of a loon on the water. The house behind me was still and peaceful. As I watched the creek glisten under the moonlight, I became aware of a figure in my peripheral vision. There, standing just beyond the porch railing, was the silhouette of a man. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. He looked like he belonged in another time, wearing an old oilskin coat, head down, as if scanning the river's edge. Then he turned slowly to face me. In his eyes, I saw something I couldn't quite identify. A deep, aching sorrow. He spoke, but it wasn't a voice. It was more like the creek's gurgle turned inside out, a sound on the edge of hearing. "I'm still here," it seemed to say. Then he was gone. The figure dissolved into the night as if he had never been there. The cool night air felt strangely warm on my face as I sat frozen on the porch. A distant howl of wind through the treetops felt like gentle tears falling. I realized Mrs. Caldwell had been right next to him that night, listening and waiting. For the first time, I didn't feel afraid. Instead, I felt connected to them, two souls entwined by that old river. I left the porch light on that night, and every night after, like a beacon for them. Inside, the house felt different, a little lighter, as if we finally weren't entirely alone. The house at Alder Creek had given me fear, but in the end, it gave me understanding. It started on a late September morning, with crisp air and golden light filtering through the evergreens of the Cascade Mountains. I was deep in the woods of British Columbia on a solo camping trip, chasing solitude in the hope that a week off-grid could fix something in my head. The forest felt alive around me. Mossy trunks were carpeted in green lichen, while the smell of pine and damp earth filled the air. My dog Growler padded beside me as I hiked along the narrow trail. He was a quiet companion and a comfort on the lonely road. I pitched my tent by a small creek bank after hiking miles. The world was quiet here, except for the rustle of leaves and the gurgle of the water. That first night, I slept like a log under the canvas of my tent. The next morning, I planned to hike to Bella Lake a few miles west. I filled my canteen from the creek's clear water, and as I knelt to scoop a drink, I noticed footprints on the soft mud near the water's edge. They looked human, not too deep. Someone had been here recently. Strange, I thought. The nearest road was an hour away, and I hadn't seen another soul since I arrived. My heart skipped a beat at the thought of a stranger wandering so far off trail, but I shrugged it off. Probably another camper who left early. Growler sniffed at the tracks, ears perked, but then trotted away as if they were nothing to worry about. By late afternoon, I reached Bella Lake, a glassy body of water nestled between ridges of fir and cedar. The trees were silent spectators around the shoreline. I set up camp in a grassy clearing, scarred by old burnt logs, then decided to take a swim. The water was frigid but clear, reflecting pine trees like cathedral spires. I was alone, or so I thought. When I climbed out and hung my towel from a branch to dry, I noticed something odd on a nearby tree trunk. A blank patch of bark scraped clean of moss. Someone had removed it intentionally, I realized. I tried to ignore it. At dusk, I built a fire. The burning pine cones popped and crackled, shadows dancing between the trunks. I ate canned beans, warmed on the flame, and drank bitter coffee, fending off the sudden chill. A couple of airplanes went overhead, leaving faint white trails across the lavender sky. I even snapped a few photos of the twilight as the stars came out, trying to shake off the uneasy feeling in my gut. But as midnight came, something changed. I lay on my sleeping pad listening to the forest, and every so often the rustling of branches far beyond sounded like footsteps or dragging feet. I told myself it was an animal bear, or deer perhaps, but the sound was too deliberate, too close. Around 2 a.m., Growler shot upright and started barking ferociously. I bolted upright myself. The fire had almost died, and the tent flap rustled in a breeze I didn't feel. My heart pounded. Then I heard it, a faint whispering, like someone speaking just beyond the edge of the firelight. It was barely audible, like a breath turned into words. I froze, gripping my flashlight and petting Growler to calm him. "Hello?" I croaked into the darkness. No answer, just a shifting shadow among the trees. I whispered back, voice shaking, "Who's there?" The only answer was a snap of a twig. Alone again. Whatever was out there remained hidden, feeding off the darkness. Sleep was out of the question after that. I spent the rest of the night on edge, sitting by the weak fire, Growler by my feet, alert as ever. The moon broke through the clouds. Each time I thought I saw movement in the trees, I snapped on the flashlight and scanned, but always saw nothing. Once, I thought I saw a pair of eyes reflecting in the darkness a dozen feet away. When I flashed the beam on them, they vanished. My nerves were shredded. I even started sleeping in my clothes, half expecting to have to run. Finally, as the sky lightened, I packed up as fast as I could. Anxiety felt like a heavy stone in my chest. I debated leaving Bella Lake entirely, but I also needed to know what had been out there. I decided to hike out the other side of the lake, hoping the new trail would lead me back to civilization. As I trudged along the water's edge, something on a tree stopped me cold. Another carving, similar to the first. My breath caught. Beneath the crude symbol on the bark were letters etched deep in the wood. My fingers traced them, and my skin went cold. They were my own initials, but backwards, as if written by someone facing me. Before I could fully comprehend, I heard it again, right behind me, barely above a breath, the whisper, and distinctly, my name. I ran. Trees and branches whipped past. Growler yelped but ran beside me. My lungs burned and heart hammered in my ears as I pushed myself forward, not looking back. I didn't stop until the trees finally thinned. I don't remember exactly how I escaped the woods. All I know is I burst through the tree line hours later, still in shock, with Growler at my heels. The campfire, the carvings, the footprints, the forest, swallowed them back into silence. I still can't explain who or what was out there. That was the last campsite I ever pitched.
I moved into the old flat on Brick Lane the week after Christmas, hoping to leave my troubles behind in London. The building smelled of damp wood and boiled cabbage when I first arrived. but it was cheap rent near the bookstore where I planned to spend my days. The flat's one bedroom was cozy enough, with a narrow hallway leading to the small kitchen and living room. I remember the first night. I lay awake, staring at the ceiling. I could just make out the silhouette of my next-door neighbor through a gap in the curtains of the flat across the hall. At first, I thought the tapping on the wall was just a leaky pipe or the neighbors settling in, but then it became more frequent. A gentle but distinct knock, 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 like tiny footsteps pacing back and forth in the night. My heart would leap each time, but I'd tell myself I was being silly and roll over. I didn't want to panic in an empty flat with nothing but unfamiliar noises. During the afternoons, I tried to distract myself by unpacking and making my flat feel like home, hanging up a few prints I had, arranging my books on the shelves to look tidy. A week in, I started coming home to find the pictures on my walls slightly askew, even though I had hung them perfectly straight the day before. Once, I found a bookmark I had inserted in a novel sitting on my desk, open to a blank page. It felt like a child's game, someone playing pranks from the shadows. I joked about it with a coworker at the bookshop, even showing him one of the photos that had fallen. He looked uneasy, telling me to get a change for the door and not to stay out so late. I hurried home before dark after that. That evening, I changed the locks on the front door, installing a new deadbolt. It gave me a brief moment of relief, but it didn't last. One night, after returning late from work, I noticed my front door chain was unlocked, even though I was sure I had locked it when I left. Panic knotted my stomach. I flipped on every light and searched the flat from top to bottom, but found nothing amiss. My hands trembled as I double-checked the chain, securing it tightly. I crawled into bed with the lights on, and eventually, the exhaustion took over. Paranoia crept into my thoughts. Every time I took a shower or left a window open to let in air, I had this nagging sense that I wasn't alone. My phone buzzing in my pocket would sometimes feel like it was in someone else's hand. I even started sleeping with the radio on all night long, the music a thin shield against the silence. But the noises in the walls didn't stop. Some nights they grew louder, like claws scraping behind the plaster. I even noticed fresh scratch marks on the wood floor in front of the bathroom door, as if someone had dragged a key or sharp object across it. Late one stormy night, I sat on the edge of my bed, staring at the dark hallway. Footsteps. Slow, deliberate, pacing just beyond my bedroom door. My breath caught in my throat. "Who's there?" I whispered, voice shaking. The footsteps stopped. All I heard was the rain tapping on the window and my own heart pounding. I flicked on the light and flung open my door. The hallway was empty. Goosebumps rose on my arms as I tiptoed out and checked every corner. The closet, under the bed, behind curtains. But there was no one there. My hands were clammy as I slid back under the covers, willing myself to sleep. Over the next few days, I could barely sleep. Every unfamiliar creak made me freeze. I even started sleeping fully dressed, as if at any moment I might have to run. The thought that someone had been living behind my walls, watching me day after day, shattered me. When dawn finally came, I gathered what little courage I had. The next morning, a deeper terror took hold. As if on instinct, I inspected every corner of the flat. Behind the loose floorboard in the hallway, I found a small camera lens staring back at me from the wood. My blood ran cold as I realized it had been pointed straight into my bedroom. I shook violently, fingers trembling as I traced the wires into the wall. A chill settled in my bones when I discovered there were multiple hidden lenses in walls and ceilings throughout the apartment. The living room, the tiny kitchen, even the hallway, closet. In each place, I found a small camera lens and a bundle of wires. My entire life had been captured in those lenses without my knowing. I left Brick Lane the very next morning, carrying just a backpack and my suitcase. My landlord acted shocked when I confronted him and quickly changed the locks himself, insisting he would investigate. But I felt exposed and broken, knowing how deeply violated I had been. 4 months after, I avoided that street. I took a new apartment far away, convinced the distance would bring peace. Yet in my dreams, I sometimes hear that faint tapping at the wall again. I keep my curtains closed and the radio on, and the memory of those eyes in the dark remains. Every creak in the night makes my heart jump, and for years after that night, I would have nightmares of faint tapping on the walls. I keep telling myself it was just paranoia, but something inside me knows I'm not entirely safe. Even now, I double-check every door and window, and sometimes, on bright sunny days, I look over my shoulder out of habit. In that old flat, I learned the hard way. I'm never truly alone. I moved into the old craftsman house in rural Oregon, thinking I was done with life's surprises. The creaking floorboards and thin walls didn't bother me. Not at first anyway. The rent was impossibly cheap, and the landlord even warned me about the house's history, but I needed the bargain, so I just shrugged it off. I was never the type to believe in ghosts. That first night, a knock came on my bedroom door at exactly 3:17 a.m. A soft tap, followed by a low whisper I couldn't quite make out. I froze, my heart pounding in my chest, completely unsure if I should react or just cry out. After that night, sleep became a distant memory. I was exhausted, twitchy. The whispering returned, and not just at night. It started creeping into my days, like a phantom thought just under my breath. I began noticing more. Shadows would linger in the corners of my vision, and I constantly had the feeling of being watched, even when I was completely alone. Doors creaked open and then shut on their own. One night, I left the radio on just to drown out the oppressive silence. The static crackled, throwing fragments of words I couldn't grasp into the darkness. For a fleeting moment, I even thought I heard my name whispered by the wind. I would lie motionless on the bed, just waiting for something else to happen. Once, as I crept up the stairs, I felt a cold breath on the back of my neck. The silence that followed was deafening, as if the house itself was holding its breath. Every hair on my arm stood on end as I reached the landing. I had to know more. During daylight hours, I scoured the internet and the local library for the house's history. I found an old newspaper clipping from 1923. A family had vanished from this very house, without a trace. The mother, Miriam Whitlock, was said to have summoned something dark during a seance she held in the attic. She supposedly lost her mind after her children disappeared, and the town branded her a witch. People whispered that the house was cursed, that whatever she'd called upon remained trapped inside its walls. One article even mentioned scratch marks on the attic door, as though something desperate had tried to claw its way out. That night, I set up my phone to record video in the living room and bedroom. When I reviewed the footage the next afternoon, a deep chill crawled down my spine. In one clip, the living room was empty, but then a faint silhouette drifted by the doorway. It moved jerkily, like a marionette, with its strings cut. The camera's static noise seemed to spill into a whisper. Miriam. My chest tightened as I replayed the footage, realizing the figure moved just as the old articles described Miriam's frantic state. Later, I saw something else in the video, teeny muddy footprints appearing on the dust-covered floor. I paused the tape. There they were, dirty little feet that were definitely not mine. On the sixth night, it became undeniable. Something wanted, and I woke from a nightmare to find my bedroom shrouded in gloom. A tall figure was hunched at the foot of my bed, impossibly tall with limbs that were far too long. The thing's head cocked unnaturally, as if it were sniffing the air. I fumbled for my flashlight and hid its face. It was pale and gaunt, with deep hollow eyes and lips peeled back in a cruel, sharp grin. I felt its hunger like acid in my gut. Before I could even scream, it was gone, vanished into the darkness with a wheezing, animal sigh. By now, I was barely sleeping at all. I boarded up the windows and carved a single warning into the hallway wall. Do not trust IT at dusk. The phone and internet would always die, as if cut off by unseen hands. One morning, I came out to find the hallway mirror shattered like a dirty handprint smeared across the shards. My friends stopped answering my calls. I started keeping my keys and flashlight under my pillow, with a kitchen knife on the bedside table. Every strange noise sent a fresh jolt of adrenaline through my veins. I was living on caffeine fear, no longer knowing who or what I could trust. 3 weeks in, it happened. I woke to the sound of the front door slowly creaking open. Cold air licked through the cracks. Muddy footprints marked the wooden floor, trailing directly to my bedroom door. I squeezed my eyes shut, my heart hammering in my throat, and opened them to a living nightmare. There it stood in the doorway, a figure tall and thin, with skin like ash, holding something. In its arms was a little girl, a ghost huddled and trembling, her eyes wide and haunted. She looked right at me, her small face smudged with dark dirt and tears, and she whispered a name. Rebecca. Then she lifted a trembling finger and pointed to the demon standing right behind her. I forced myself to move, stepping back as the creature lowered its head. It had pale, peeling skin and long, crooked nails that clicked on the wood floor. The stench of rot and sulfur filled the air. It sniffed again, and I could feel its hunger. Hear a low growl deep in its throat. My lungs burned as I turned to run. The child's wail echoed behind me, and I could have sworn her ghostly fingers brushed my hand as I fled. I bolted from the room. Behind me came the sound of something heavy thudding on the stairs. I ran down the hall, every floorboard groaning under the demon's weight. At the last second, I threw myself through the front door and out into the stormy morning. The rain smacked my face as if trying to wash away the nightmare. I jumped into my car, hands trembling on the wheel, and didn't hesitate. The sky flashed with a distant thunderclap. In my rearview mirror, I thought I saw a dark shape at the upstairs window, the demoness. Glowing eyes watching me leave. The next flash came too late to be sure. For one terrifying moment, I nearly hit the brakes, but instinct screamed at me to keep going. I just drove. My legs trembled on the pedals as the house grew smaller behind me, the storm swallowing the road. I haven't gone back to retrieve anything. The local paper called it vandalism by squatters, but I know better. Something evil lives in that house, a demon born of a mother's grief and a trapped child I couldn't save. Every night now, in my new apartment, I hear faint tapping on the walls and distant whispers just outside my door. Sometimes I wake up thinking I see the little girl's face at the window, pale and pleading. I keep a lamp on next to my bed, just watching the shadows grow longer. My blood runs cold, knowing that some things never, ever leave. And now, every night, I sleep with one eye open, especially at 3:17, half expecting it to come for me. I haven't slept a full night since. Thanks for watching. If you have a story like this, share it in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe for more.
This story comes from a researcher I know, Michael, who spent years digging into one of Canada's most disturbing mysteries. What he uncovered completely shattered his belief in a rational world. Back in 1930, a fur trapper named Joe LaBelle was traveling through the remote wilderness of Nunavut, northern Canada. He'd traded with the people there, shared meals with them, and had always been welcomed. But on this particular day, the village was eerily silent. It wasn't just empty. It was abandoned in a way that defied all logic. Kayaks were still pulled up on the shore. Cooking pots hung over cold fire pits. Food still inside, now frozen solid. Tools and clothes were scattered about, as if people had just dropped them mid-task. But the people themselves, every man, woman, and child, had vanished. Joe searched for hours, calling out their names, but found nothing. No signs of a struggle, no bodies, and no clues as to where they might have gone. It was as if they had simply ceased to exist. But the most unsettling discovery was the sled dogs. A team of them had been tied up at the edge of the village, and they had all starved to death, still tethered to their posts. The villagers, known for their deep connection to their animals, would never have abandoned them like this. Joe immediately reported his finding to the Royal Canadian Mounted Police. When the search party arrived, the mystery only deepened. They discovered that the village's ancestral graves had been desecrated. Bodies buried for decades were now exposed, scattered around their disturbed resting places. But here's the chilling part. The ground was frozen solid. Opening those graves would have required immense force or tools the Inuit simply didn't possess. The official investigation hit a dead end, and the case was quietly shelved. For years, the story of Anjikun Lake was dismissed as a myth. But Michael found something that changed everything. Buried in the RCMP archives, he uncovered a sealed file from 1931. Inside were witness statements that had never been made public. 3 separate trappers and hunters reported seeing strange pulsating blue-green lights hovering silently over the lake in the days leading up to the disappearance. The lights would then shoot upwards into the sky at impossible speeds. The most terrifying account came from an elderly Inuit man named Arnaluk. In his statement, Arnaluk claimed he was fishing on the lake when he witnessed the entire village walking in a single, silent line towards the water. They moved in perfect unison, as if being pulled by invisible strings. They walked straight into the icy lake and kept going until the water closed over their heads. None of them struggled or screamed. Arnaluk said he tried to call out, tried to paddle toward them, but he was completely paralyzed, forced to watch as they all disappeared. As soon as the last person was gone, he regained control of his body and fled, never looking back. He never spoke of it until the RCMP questioned him. And then Arnaluk vanished too. His camp was found abandoned 3 weeks later. Michael managed to track down Arnaluk's only living descendant, a granddaughter in Yellowknife. When he asked about the story, she went pale and refused to talk. But just before she closed the door, she whispered, "He didn't disappear. He went back to the lake. Something was calling him. Something that's been calling our family ever since." Driven by this, Michael went to Anjakuni Lake himself, hoping for answers. He only lasted 2 nights. He won't share the full details, but he told me he heard singing coming from the water. Voices calling to him in a language he didn't know, but somehow understood. They were inviting him to come closer, to join them in the lake. He drove away that night and has never returned. The mystery of what happened to the people of Anjakuni Lake and what still waits in the water remains. My friends and I rented a cabin near Wicker Falls for a long weekend in October. There were 4 of us: myself, my boyfriend Marcus, and our friends Jen and Tyler. We wanted to disconnect from the world for a few days. No phones, no internet, just nature and good company. The cabin was remote, about 2 hours from the nearest town, surrounded by dense forest and accessible only by a dirt road. The first 2 days were perfect. We hiked, cooked meals together, and spent the evenings playing cards by the fireplace. But on the 3rd night, things changed. It started with the knocking. Around 2 in the morning, I woke up to a sound coming from the front door. 3 slow, deliberate knocks. I lay there in the darkness, listening, wondering if I had imagined it. Then it came again. Knock, knock, knock. I shook Marcus awake. He heard it, too. We crept out of the bedroom and met Jen and Tyler. In the hallway, they had also been woken by the sound. The 4 of us stood there, staring at the front door, none of us wanting to open it. Tyler finally grabbed a flashlight and approached the door. He looked through the small window beside it and said he couldn't see anyone. Against our protests, he opened the door and stepped onto the porch. Nothing. No one was there. The forest was completely silent. No wind, no animals, nothing. Just an oppressive, unnatural stillness. We went back to bed, but none of us slept well. The next morning, we found something that made our blood run cold. Carved into the wooden railing of the porch were 4 tally marks. They hadn't been there the day before. We would have noticed. We tried to rationalize it. Maybe it was a prank. Maybe some local kids knew about the cabin and were trying to scare tourists. But deep down, none of us believed that. That night, the knocking returned. This time, it wasn't at the front door. It was at the bedroom windows. All of them, simultaneously. We gathered in the living room, flashlights in hand, and that's when Marcus noticed something through the window. A figure was standing at the edge of the tree line, maybe 50 feet from the cabin. It was too dark to make out any features, but the shape was unmistakably human. It was just standing there, facing the cabin, completely motionless. Jen started crying. Tyler wanted to confront whoever it was, but Marcus held him back. We watched the figure for what felt like hours, but it never moved. Eventually, we barricaded the doors and tried to wait until morning. At some point, I must have dozed off, because I woke up to sunlight streaming through the windows. The others were still asleep around me. I got up to check the porch, hoping the nightmare was over. The tally marks had changed. Now there were 3. One of us was missing. Tyler was gone. We searched the cabin, the surrounding area, everywhere we could think of. We found his shoes by the back door, as if he had walked outside barefoot in the middle of the night. But there were no footprints in the soft earth beyond the porch. It was like he had simply vanished. We packed our things and left immediately. We reported Tyler missing to the police in the nearest town. They searched the area for weeks, but never found any trace of him. The detective who handled the case told us something that still haunts me. He said the cabin had a history. Over the past 40 years, 7 people had gone missing from that property, always in groups, always during October, and always on the 3rd night of their stay. The locals call it the Wicker Falls Watcher. They say something lives in those woods, something old, something patient. It counts its prey, it waits, and when it's ready, it takes one. The tally marks, the detective explained, represent how many are left. I think about Tyler every day. I think about those tally marks counting down. And I think about the figure at the tree line, standing so still, watching us sleep. Some nights, I dream I'm back at that cabin. And in the dream, there's knocking at my bedroom door. Slow, deliberate, and the tally marks on the door say 1.
This story was submitted by a man named Derek from rural Vermont. He asked me not to use his real last name, and after hearing what happened to him, I completely understand why. It was late November, and Derek was driving home from his brother's place in New Hampshire. The visit had run longer than expected, and by the time he hit the road, it was already past 11 at night. He decided to take Route 112 through the White Mountains of Winding, isolated stretch of highway that cuts through dense forests and offers almost no cell service for miles. The night was cold and moonless. His headlights carved weak tunnels through the darkness, barely illuminating the trees that pressed in on both sides of the road. He hadn't seen another car in over 40 minutes. Around midnight, Derek noticed something strange. His radio, which had been playing static since he lost the last station, suddenly cleared. A voice came through, not music, not a DJ, just a voice. It was calm, almost whispering, and it said his name. Derek, then nothing, just static again. He convinced himself it was his imagination, maybe fatigue playing tricks on him. But 10 minutes later, it happened again. This time, the voice said something else. You're not alone on this road. Derek's hands tightened on the steering wheel. He checked his rearview mirror. Nothing but darkness behind him. He sped up, wanting nothing more than to get off that highway. Then he saw her. Standing on the side of the road was a woman in a white dress. She wasn't hitchhiking. She was just standing there, facing the road, completely motionless. Her hair was long and dark, hanging over her face. As his headlights washed over her, she didn't move, didn't flinch, didn't even seem to breathe. Derek slowed down instinctively, his foot hovering over the brake. Every rational part of his brain told him not to stop, but something made him look in his rearview mirror as he passed her. She was gone. His heart pounding, Derek floored the accelerator. The trees blurred past him as he pushed the car faster and faster. But then, impossibly, he saw her again standing in the exact same position, maybe a quarter mile ahead. Same white dress, same dark hair, same unnatural stillness. He didn't slow down this time. He kept his eyes fixed forward and drove past her without looking back. But something made him glance at his side mirror. She was in his back seat. Derek screamed and swerved, nearly driving off the road. When he looked again, the back seat was empty. But the radio crackled to life one more time. The voice returned, clearer now, almost like it was coming from directly behind him. I've been listening to you for so long, Derek. Every night when you drive alone, every time you think no one is watching, I'm always here. In the silence between the static, the radio died. Derek didn't stop driving until he reached the next town, a full 30 miles away. He pulled into a gas station, hands shaking, and sat in his car for nearly an hour before he could bring himself to get out. When he finally went inside to buy coffee, the attendant, an older man with tired eyes, looked at him and said, "You came through on 112, didn't you?" Derek nodded. The man leaned closer. "You saw her? The woman in white. People been seeing her for decades. They say she died out there in the 60s, waiting for someone who never came to pick her up. Froze to death on the side of the road. Now she waits for drivers who travel alone at night. But she was in my car," Derek said. "She was in my backseat." The attendant's face went pale. "Then she's chosen you, the one she gets into the car with. They say she never really leaves. She just listens, waits, and one day, when you're driving alone again, she'll be there. And that time, she won't just watch." Derek moved to a city apartment the following month. He sold his car. He takes public transit everywhere now. But some nights, when he's lying in bed in complete silence, he swears he can hear static faint, distant, like a radio between stations. And sometimes, just before he falls asleep, he hears his name whispered from somewhere in the darkness of his room. He never drives alone anymore, and he never will again.
This story was sent to me by a woman named Claire, who grew up in Niagara Falls, Ontario. She swears every word is true, and after what she experienced, she's never gone back. There's a place near Niagara Falls that locals call the Screaming Tunnel. It's an old drainage tunnel that runs beneath the railway tracks, built sometime in the early 1900s. From the outside, it looks aberradomed, crumbling limestone walls covered in graffiti, puddles of stagnant water, and an oppressive darkness that seems to swallow your flashlight beam just a few feet in. The legend says that a young girl died in that tunnel. Some versions claim she was fleeing from a farmhouse fire and collapsed inside, burning to death. Others say her father, driven mad, set her ablaze within those stone walls. But all versions agree on one thing. If you stand in the center of the tunnel at midnight and strike a match, you'll hear her scream. Claire first heard about the Screaming Tunnel when she was 16. Her older brother Daniel and his friends were planning to go there on Halloween night, and she begged to come along. Against his better judgment, Daniel agreed. They arrived around 11:30, parking on a dark rural road and walking through the woods to reach the tunnel entrance. Claire remembers how the temperature seemed to drop as they approached, how the air felt thick and wrong, like something was pressing against her chest. There were 5 of them in total. They entered the tunnel together, their flashlights creating weak pools of light against the absolute blackness. Claire could hear water dripping somewhere deep inside, a rhythmic sound that seemed almost deliberate, like footsteps. When they reached the center of the tunnel, Daniel pulled out a box of matches. His friends were laughing nervously, making jokes to mask their fear. Claire stood slightly behind them, her back to the entrance they had come through. Daniel struck the first match. It went out immediately, as if something had blown on it from very close by. He struck another. This one lasted perhaps 3 seconds before extinguishing itself, and in that brief moment of light, Claire saw something that made her blood freeze. There was a figure standing at the far end of the tunnel, a small figure, child-sized, with long dark hair that seemed wet or burned. She couldn't tell which. The figure wasn't moving. It was just standing there, watching them. "Did you see that?" Claire whispered, but no one answered. They were all staring at Daniel's third match. This match stayed lit. The flame flickered and danced, casting strange shadows on the tunnel walls, and then they heard it. A scream. It started low, almost like a moan. but it built rapidly into something inhuman, a shriek of absolute agony that seemed to come from everywhere at once. The sound bounced off the tunnel walls, amplifying until Claire felt like her eardrums would burst. They ran. All 5 of them abandoned any pretense of courage and sprinted toward the entrance. Claire was the last one out, and just before she emerged into the night air, she felt something grab the back of her jacket. Cold fingers. Small, child-sized fingers, gripping the fabric with impossible strength. She screamed and tore herself free, stumbling out of the tunnel and falling onto the muddy ground. When she looked back, there was nothing there, just darkness and the faint smell of smoke. They drove home in silence. No one spoke about what happened, not that night, not ever. Daniel and his friends graduated and moved away. None of them keep in touch anymore. But Claire's story doesn't end there. 3 weeks after that Halloween night, she woke up to find something wrong with her bedroom. The temperature had dropped dramatically, and there was a smell, faint but unmistakable, of something burning. She sat up in bed and saw, standing in the corner of her room, the silhouette of a child. The figure didn't move. It simply stood there in the darkness, watching her with eyes that Claire swears glowed faintly orange, like dying embers. She closed her eyes and prayed. When she opened them, the figure was gone. But on her bedroom door, she found something that still gives her nightmares. A small handprint burned into the wood at exactly the height a young child would reach. Claire moved out of her parents' house the following year. She's lived in 3 different apartments since then, and in every single one, at some point, she's woken to find that same small burned handprint somewhere in her home. She believes the girl from the tunnel followed her. She believes that by entering that place, by being present when the match was struck, she became connected to whatever haunts those stone walls. And she believes that one day, the Gert will do more than leave marks on her doors. Have you ever had that feeling, that deep in your gut sensation that you're being watched? For Colin, a 24-year-old just trying to make his way in the city, that feeling became a terrifying reality. His story starts on a Tuesday, just like any other. He was walking home from work, earphones in, lost in his own world. But as he passed the old, derelict textile mill on the edge of town, something caught his eye. A movement in a dusty, boarded-up window on the 3rd floor. He pulled out an earphone, squinting. There, in the gloom, was a figure. A man. He couldn't make out any features, no face, no clothes, just a tall, thin silhouette. And then, the figure did something that sent a shiver down Colin's spine. It raised a hand and waved. A slow, deliberate wave. Colin froze, heart pounding. It had to be a trick of the light, a prank. He shook his head and hurried home, trying to forget what he saw, but he couldn't forget. The image of the waving man was seared into his mind. He spent the evening trying to distract himself, watching movies, scrolling through his phone. But the unease lingered like a bad taste. Later that night, as he got ready for bed, he glanced out his apartment window. His blood ran cold. Across the street, standing under a flickering streetlight, was the same tall, thin silhouette, featureless, motionless, just watching his building. Colin's breath hitched. This wasn't a coincidence. He quickly drew the curtains, his hands trembling. He told himself it was just a person waiting for someone, but he knew it was the man from the mill. Sleep didn't come easily that night. Every creak of the building, every distant siren made him jump. The next day, the feeling of being watched followed him like a shadow. On the crowded subway, he felt a pair of eyes on him. He scanned the faces in the car, but saw no one out of the ordinary. Yet, the feeling persisted. At lunch, Sitting in a busy park, he saw him again. The man was standing by a distant fountain, partially obscured by a tree. Same silhouette, same unnerving stillness. He wasn't waving this time, just standing there, watching. Colin's appetite vanished. He packed up his lunch and practically ran back to the office, constantly looking over his shoulder. He felt like he was losing his mind. Who was this man? What did he want? The questions hammered in his brain, each one more terrifying than the last. He felt a paranoia he'd never known, a constant low-level hum of fear that vibrated through his entire body. The true horror came that night. Colin made sure every door and window was locked. He triple-checked them. He tried to convince himself he was safe, that he was overreacting. He sat in his living room, the TV on but the volume low, just for some background noise. Then he heard it, a soft, scraping sound from his front door. He muted the TV, straining to listen. Silence. He held his breath. Then a slow, deliberate creak as the doorknob began to turn. Colin's heart stopped. He had locked it. He knew he had. He stared, paralyzed with fear, as the knob twisted back and forth. It stopped. A heavy silence filled the apartment. Colin backed away from the door, grabbing the heaviest thing he could find, a cast iron pan. He waited, his entire body shaking. Then a new sound, a soft, rhythmic tapping. Tap, tap, tap. It was coming from his bedroom window. He crept towards the bedroom, his stomach in knots. He peered through a tiny gap in the curtains. There, on the fire escape outside his third-story window, was the silhouette. It was closer than ever before, and it was waving. That slow, deliberate, terrifying wave. Colin finally found his voice and screamed. He called the police, but by the time they arrived, the fire escape was empty. There was no sign of anyone. They found nothing, and Colin was left alone with the chilling certainty that the waving man was still out there, watching, waiting. And he knew, with a dread that settled deep in his bones, that one day a locked door wouldn't be enough to keep him out. Have you ever dreamed of moving into the perfect house? The kind with a big yard, a white picket fence, and plenty of room for your family to grow. That's exactly what the Miller family thought they'd found. John, Sarah, and their 2 kids, Emily and little Lily, were ecstatic. It was a fresh start, a dream come true. But some dreams, as they would soon discover, can turn into absolute nightmares. The first few weeks were idyllic, unpacking boxes, painting walls, filling the rooms with laughter. It was perfect. Then, the first letter arrived. It was in a plain white envelope, with no return address. John opened it, thinking it was a welcome note from a neighbor. But the words inside sent a chill down his spine. It read, "Welcome to my house. I've been watching you." The letter was signed simply, "The Watcher." They tried to brush it off as a sick prank, maybe some local kids with a twisted sense of humor. But then another letter came. This one was more detailed, more unnerving. It described things only someone inside the house would know. It mentioned the color Sarah painted the living room, the lullaby she sang to Lily at night, even the spot where Emily hid her diary. The Watcher knew everything. Panic began to set in. The dream home was starting to feel like a prison. John went to the police, but they were skeptical. A few creepy letters. There wasn't much they could do. They advised installing a security system, which John did immediately. Cameras were placed everywhere, covering every angle of the property. For a few days, there was silence, and the Millers dared to hope it was over. But the Watcher was smarter than that. The third letter appeared on the kitchen counter, right next to the coffee machine. There was no sign of a break. The doors were locked, the windows were shut, the alarm was on. How did it get there? This letter was different. It wasn't just watching, it was warning. It spoke of the house's history, of the families that had lived there before. It said the house had a thirst and that it chooses who stays. The letter ended with a terrifying sentence. The house wants young blood, and it has chosen. John and Sarah were terrified. They started researching the property's history, and what they found was horrifying. The public records were clean, but digging deeper into old town archives and newspaper clippings, they uncovered a dark pattern. Every family that had lived in that house over the last century had met with a tragic end. Accidents, disappearances, families turning on each other. It was a cycle of misery, and they were next. They decided they had to leave. They packed their bags in a frenzy, ready to abandon the house and everything in it. But as they were about to walk out the door, little Lily started crying. Not just crying, but screaming. She refused to leave. She kept pointing back into the house, saying, "He doesn't want us to go. The house will be sad." John and Sarah's blood ran cold. The house wasn't just a place anymore. It was an entity, and it had somehow connected with their youngest daughter. Desperate, they contacted a paranormal investigator, a woman named Elena, who specialized in haunted properties. Elena arrived and immediately felt the oppressive energy. As she walked through the rooms, she explained that some places hold on to the energy of past events, creating a consciousness of their own. This house, she said, was one of the strongest she'd ever encountered. It fed on fear and sorrow, and it had latched onto Lily's innocent energy. The Watcher, Elena theorized, wasn't a person stalking them from the outside. The Watcher was the house itself. It was communicating its desires, its intentions, through the letters. But how were they getting inside? The mystery deepened, becoming more tangled and terrifying with each passing day. The house was playing a game with them, a game they couldn't possibly win. The final letter confirmed their worst fears. It wasn't on the counter or in the mailbox. It was clutched in little Lily's hand as she slept. John gently pried it from her fingers. The handwriting was shaky, almost childlike, but the message was pure evil. "You cannot leave. She is mine now. She will speak for me." Lily had become the new messenger for the Watcher. The house had claimed her. The dream was over. The perfect home had become a living tomb, and the entity within it had taken their daughter's soul as its own. They were trapped, not by walls and doors, but by a malevolent force that wanted them to stay forever. Another family to feed its unending hunger. And every night, they could hear faint whispers coming from Lily's room, the voice of the house, planning its next move. So next time you see that perfect house for sale, just remember the Miller family. Sometimes the most beautiful places hide the darkest secrets. Thanks for watching, and if you enjoy stories that will keep you up at night, make sure to subscribe for more. Stay safe out there. Sarah. Chen was 16 years old when her parents decided she was finally mature enough to spend a weekend alone at their family's rural farmhouse in Blackwood County. The property had been in her mother's family for 4 generations, sprawling, isolated homestead surrounded by cornfields that stretched to the horizon in every direction. The nearest neighbor was 3 miles away, and cell service was spotty at best. "You'll have Max for company," her mother said, gesturing to their German shepherd, who wagged his tail from the back seat of the car. "And the landline works fine. We'll be back Sunday evening." Sarah wasn't worried. She had been begging for this opportunity for years, a chance to prove her independence. To have the house to herself, to do absolutely nothing without anyone looking over her shoulder. She watched her parents' car disappear down the long gravel driveway, then turned to Max with a grin. "Just you and me, buddy." The first day passed without incident. Sarah binge-watched horror movies on the ancient television in the living room, ate cereal for dinner, and stayed up past midnight reading by flashlight just because she could. Max slept on the floor beside her bed, as he always did, his warm presence a comfort in the creaking old house. It was the second night when things began to go wrong. Sarah woke at 2:47 a.m. to the sound of dripping. Slow, rhythmic, persistent like a leaky faucet somewhere in the house. She lay in the darkness, listening, trying to identify the source. The bathroom was down the hall. The kitchen was downstairs. The sound seemed to be coming from everywhere and nowhere at once. Drip, drip, drip. She reached down toward the floor, letting her hand dangle over the side of the bed. Max's rough tongue licked her fingers. Once, twice, 3 times, and she relaxed. Everything was fine. Max was there. She was safe, but the dripping continued. Sarah pulled her hand back under the covers and tried to sleep, but the sound wouldn't let her rest. It seemed to be getting louder, more insistent, as if the source was moving closer. She lay rigid in the darkness, eyes wide, ears straining. Drip, drip. At 3:15 a.m., she finally gathered the courage to investigate. She swung her legs over the side of the bed, her feet touching the cold wooden floor, and reached down to pat Max's head before standing. Her hand touched empty space. Sarah froze. She could have sworn Max was right there. He had licked her hand just 20 minutes ago. She fumbled for her phone and turned on the flashlight, sweeping it across the floor beside her bed. No, Max. A cold knot formed in her stomach. Max, she called softly. Max, where are you, boy? The dripping continued. It was louder now, and Sarah realized with growing horror that it was coming from the bathroom down the hall. The door was closed. She remembered closing it before bed, but thin strips of light leaked from beneath it, and shadows moved within those strips. Someone had turned on the bathroom light. Sarah wanted to run. Every instinct in her body screamed at her to flee down the stairs, out the front door, into the cornfields where she could disappear into the darkness. But Max was somewhere in this house, and she couldn't leave him behind. She crept down the hallway, her bare feet silent on the worn floorboards, her phone's flashlight cutting a thin beam through the shadows. The dripping grew louder with each step. Drip, drip, she reached the bathroom door and placed her trembling hand on the knob. The metal was ice cold, far colder than it should have been on a summer night. She took a deep breath, turned the knob, and pushed the door open. The smell hit her first copper and iron and something else, something organic and wrong. Then her flashlight beam found the bathtub, and Sarah's mind simply stopped processing what she was seeing. Max was in the tub. What was left of Max? His body had been arranged carefully, almost reverently, with his paws crossed over his chest like a sleeping child. His throat had been cut, and blood dripped from the edge of the tub in slow, rhythmic drops that splashed against the tile floor. Drip, drip. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was the message written on the bathroom mirror in Max's blood, each letter dripping crimson streams down the glass. Humans can lick too. Sarah screamed. She screamed until her throat was raw, until she had no breath left, until she collapsed against the bathroom doorframe and silled to the floor. And in the silence that followed her screams, she heard something else. Footsteps. Slow, deliberate footsteps climbing the stairs from the first floor. Each footfall was accompanied by a soft, wet sound, like someone licking their lips. Sarah scrambled to her feet and ran to her bedroom, slamming and locking the door behind her. She grabbed the landline phone from her nightstand and dialed 911 with shaking hands. 911, what's your emergency? Someone's in my house, Sarah whispered, her voice barely audible. They killed my dog. They're coming up the stairs. Please, please help me. Ma'am, I need you to stay calm. I'm dispatching officers to your location right now. Can you tell me your address? Sarah recited the address, her eyes fixed on the thin strip of light beneath her bedroom door. The footsteps had stopped at the top of the stairs. She could hear breathing, now slow, ragged breathing, like someone savoring a moment. Ma'am, are you still there? Yes, Sarah breathed. I can hear them outside my door. Officers are on their way. Stay on the line with me. Can you describe any? The bedroom door exploded inward, ripped from its hinges by an impact that should have been impossible. Sarah dropped the phone and screamed again, but the sound was cut short when she saw what was standing in the doorway. It was human-shaped, but wrong too tall, too thin, with limbs that bent at angles that made no anatomical sense. Its face was obscured by shadows, but Sarah could see its mouth clearly, a gaping maw filled with too many teeth, with a tongue that was impossibly long and impossibly red and impossibly wet. "I've been under your bed for 3 nights, it said, and its voice was like sandpaper scraping against bone. Your hand tasted sweet. The phone on the floor continued to emit the 911 operator's increasingly frantic voice. Ma'am, can you hear me? Officers are 5 minutes away, ma'am." Sarah tried to run, but there was nowhere to go. The creature moved faster than anything that size should be able to move, and its tongue, that horrible, dripping tongue, wrapped around her ankle before she had taken 2 steps. When the police arrived 7 minutes later, they found the bedroom door torn from its hinges and blood on the walls. They found the bathroom with its grim message still dripping on the mirror. They found paw prints in the blood that led from the tub to the front door and disappeared into the cornfields. But they never found Sarah Chen. The farmhouse has been abandoned ever since. Locals avoid the property, and the Cora fields have grown wild, swallowing the gravel driveway and creeping up to the porch steps. Sometimes, on quiet summer nights, people claim they can hear dripping coming from somewhere inside the house. And sometimes, if you're very unlucky, you might see a shape moving through the cornfields, something tall and thin and wrong, with a tongue that drags behind it through the dirt. Marcus Williams had lived in the small Ohio town of Millfield his entire 23 years, but he had never climbed the steps of Hollow Hill Cemetery. Everyone in town knew the legend, knew about the ancient caretaker ghost who appeared at the top of the 100 steps, knew about the visions of death he supposedly showed to those brave or foolish enough to make the climb. But Marcus didn't believe in ghosts. He was a graduate student in psychology, working on a thesis about the persistence of supernatural beliefs in rural American communities. Hollow Hill Cemetery was going to be his case study, and he was going to document exactly what happened when someone climbed those steps and nothing supernatural occurred. He arrived at the cemetery at midnight on a moonless October night, equipped with a video camera, a digital voice recorder, and the smug certainty of a man who had never truly been afraid of anything in his life. The cemetery was older than the town itself, collection of weathered headstones and crumbling mausoleums that dated back to the Civil War era. It sat atop a steep hill, accessible only by a narrow stone staircase that wound through thick clusters of ancient oak trees. The steps themselves were worn smooth by centuries of footsteps, and many were cracked or tilted at dangerous angles. Marcus started the climb at 12:07 a.m., counting each step aloud for the camera. Step 1, Step 2, Step 3. The first 30 steps were unremarkable. The trees pressed close on either side, their branches blocking what little starlight filtered through the clouds. But Marcus's flashlight cut a bright path through the darkness. Step 31, Step 32. At Step 40, the temperature dropped noticeably. Marcus could see his breath misting in front of his face, even though it had been a mild evening when he arrived. He told himself it was just the elevation, just the trees blocking the wind. Step 45, Step 46. At Step 50, he heard the first sound, a soft grinding noise, like stone scraping against stone. He paused, sweeping his flashlight through the trees, but saw nothing. Step 51. The grinding sound came again, closer this time. Marcus's heart was beating faster now, but he forced himself to continue. This was exactly the kind of atmospheric effect that created belief in the supernatural: darkness, isolation, ambiguous sounds that the brain interpreted as threatening. Step 60. His flashlight flickered. Marcus stopped and shook it, and the beam steadied. When he looked up, there was someone standing on the steps above him. It was an old man, impossibly old, with a face like crumpled parchment and eyes that reflected the flashlight beam like a cat's. He wore a groundskeeper's uniform that looked like it hadn't been in fashion since the 19th century, and he held a rusted shovel in one gnarled hand. "You're counting," the old man said, and his voice sounded like it was coming from very far away. That's good. Counting is important. Marcus's camera was still recording. He kept it pointed at the figure, determined to document this encounter, even as his hands trembled. "Who are you?" he asked. "I've been the caretaker here for a very long time," the old man said. "Since before your great-grandfather was born. Since before this town had a name. I watch over the dead, and sometimes when visitors come, I show them things." "What kinds of things?" The old man smiled, and his teeth were wronged and numerous, too sharp, arranged in rows like a shark's. "Would you like to see how you're going to die, Marcus Williams?" Marcus's blood ran cold. He hadn't introduced himself. He hadn't told anyone he was coming here tonight. "How do you know my name?" "I know everyone's name," the caretaker said. "Everyone who will ever climb these steps. I knew your name before you were born. I knew you would come here tonight, asking questions, seeking proof. And I know exactly how your story ends." The old man descended the steps, toward Marcus, not walking, but gliding, his feet never quite touching the worn stone. As he drew closer, Marcus saw that his uniform was stained with something dark and wet, and that his hands, the hands gripping that rusted shovel, were covered in dirt and what looked horribly like dried blood. "Stop," Marcus said, backing down a step. "Stay away from me." "You climbed 59 steps, the caretaker said. "If you want to leave safely, you need to go back down. You need to count each step. If the number matches, if there are exactly 59 steps back to the bottom, you can go home. You can live. You can forget any of this ever happened. And if the number doesn't match," the caretaker's smile widened, revealing more and more of those shark-like teeth, "then you belong to the hill. Then I show you what I've been waiting to show you since before you were born." Marcus turned and fled. He counted as he ran, his flashlight beam bouncing wildly off the trees and stones, his breath coming in ragged gasps. 59, 58, 57. The steps seemed longer going, down steeper. His feet kept slipping on the worn surfaces, and twice he nearly fell. 43, 42, 41. Behind him, he could hear the caretaker following that horrible grinding sound of the shovel dragging against stone. 30, 29, 28. The trees were pressing closer now, their branches reaching for him like grasping hands. Marcus's flashlight was growing dimmer, its beam barely penetrating the darkness. 15, 14, 13. He was almost there. He could see the bottom of the staircase, could see the iron gate that marked the cemetery entrance. Just a few more steps. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Marcus stumbled off the final step and collapsed onto the grass, gasping for air. He had made it. The count had matched. He was safe. But when he looked back at the staircase, the caretaker was standing at the bottom, directly in front of him, as if he had been there all along. "You miscounted," the old man said, and his voice was almost gentle. "No," Marcus whispered. "No," I counted. 59 down, 59 up. The numbers matched. "You started counting at step 59, the caretaker said. But you stopped at step 60. You took an extra step while you were talking to me. The count doesn't match anymore, Marcus. The count hasn't matched for a very long time." Marcus looked down at his feet and realized, with dawning horror, that he was unstanding on grass anymore. He was standing on a freshly dug graver rectangular hole in the earth, 6 feet long and 3 feet wide, with a simple wooden coffin visible at the bottom. "Would you like to see how you're going to die?" the caretaker asked, raising his shovel. Marcus screamed, but there was no one to hear him. The cemetery was empty except for the dead, and the dead had been waiting for him for a very, very long time. The next morning, hikers found Marcus Williams's camera at the bottom of Hollow Hill Cemetery's stone staircase. The memory card was corrupted beyond recovery, but forensic specialists managed to extract one final image, a blurry photograph of something standing on the steps above, holding what appeared to be a shovel. Marcus's body was never found, but sometimes, on moonless October nights, visitors to Hollow Hill Cemetery claim they can hear someone counting from somewhere on the darkened stairs, a voice that stops at 59. pauses, and then begins again from the beginning, over and over, forever.
My parents trusted me enough to leave me alone for the first time when I was 16 years old. They were attending a funeral 3 states away, and I had convinced them I was mature enough to handle 2 nights by myself. Our house was an old Victorian on the edge of town, surrounded by oak trees that blocked out most of the streetlights. It had been in my family for generations, passed down from great-grandparents I had never met. The first night went smoothly. I ordered Chinese food, watched horror movies until midnight, and fell asleep on the couch with all the lights on. When I woke up the next morning, sunlight was streaming through the windows and everything felt normal. Safe. But the second night was different. It started around 9 in the evening. I was in my bedroom working on homework when I heard something from above. Our attic was directly over my room, accessible only through a pull-down ladder in the hallway ceiling. No one ever went up there. My parents used it for storage, but they hadn't opened that hatch in years. The sound was soft at first, a gentle creaking, like old wood settling under weight. I told myself it was nothing. Old houses make noises. That is what they do. I put in my earbuds and turned up my music, trying to drown it out. But then I heard breathing. It was faint, barely audible over my music, but unmistakable. Slow, rhythmic breathing coming from directly above my head. I pulled out my earbuds and listened. The breathing continued. In and out. In and out, like someone lying on the attic floor, pressing their face against the wooden boards, exhaling into the space between us. My heart started pounding. I sat perfectly still, barely allowing myself to breathe, straining to hear. Maybe it was the wind. Maybe it was pipes. Maybe my imagination was running wild after too many horror movies. Then the breathing stopped. For a long moment, there was only silence. Heavy, oppressive silence that seemed to press down on me from above. I started to relax. Started to convince myself I had imagined the whole thing. That is when I heard the footsteps. They were slow and deliberate, moving across the attic floor directly above my room. One step, then another, then another. They stopped right above my bed. I grabbed my phone and ran out of my room, slamming the door behind me. I stood in the hallway, staring up at the attic hatch, my hands shaking so badly I could barely hold my phone. The hatch was closed, same as always. The pull cord hung motionless in the still air. I called my parents. It went straight to voicemail. I called my neighbor, Mr. Henderson, who lived about a quarter mile down the road. He answered on the third ring, sounding groggy and annoyed. I told him I thought someone was in my attic. He said he would come right over. While I waited, I stood in the kitchen with a knife in my hand, watching the hallway, listening for any sound from above. The house was silent now. Completely silent. No creaking, no breathing, no footsteps, just the hum of the refrigerator and the pounding of my own heart. Mr. Henderson arrived 15 minutes later with a flashlight and a baseball bat. He was a retired police officer, built like a linebacker, and his presence made me feel marginally safer. He asked me to show him where the attic hatch was. We stood in the hallway together, looking up at that rectangular outline in the ceiling. Mr. Henderson grabbed the pull cord and yanked it down. The ladder unfolded with a loud creak, revealing nothing but darkness above. He told me to stay downstairs while he checked it out. I watched him climb that ladder, flashlight beam cutting through the darkness, baseball bat tucked under his arm. He disappeared through the hatch. I heard his footsteps moving across the attic floor. Heard him shifting boxers, checking corners. Then silence. I called up to him. No response. I called again, louder this time. Nothing. I was about to climb up after him, when his face appeared in the opening. It looked pale, even in the dim light. He climbed down slowly, folded the ladder back up, and stood there for a moment without speaking. Finally, he told me he had not found anyone up there, but he had found something else. In the far corner of the attic, behind a stack of old furniture, there was a sleeping bag. Not an old one that had been stored up there for years. A new one, recently used. with an indentation still visible where someone had been lying. Next to the sleeping bag was a pile of food wrappers and empty water bottles, and on the wall, scratched into the wooden beam, were dozens of tally marks. Someone had been living in my attic. Mr. Henderson called the police. They searched the attic and the surrounding property, but found no one. Whoever had been up there was gone. They had probably left through the small window at the back of the attic, which opened onto the roof. The police said it was likely a squatter, someone who had discovered our house was often empty and had been using the attic as shelter. They said these things happen more often than people realized. They said I was lucky, nothing worse had happened. But here's the thing that still keeps me awake at night. Those tally marks on the wall. There were 47 of Tim, 47 days. I counted them in the photos the police took. My parents and I had lived in that house for 3 years. 3 years of nights when we slept peacefully in our beds, unaware that someone was living just above us. Someone who could hear every conversation we had. Someone who knew our routines, our schedules, when we were home and when we were gone. Someone who had been breathing above my head, night after night, for 47 days before I finally heard them. We moved out of that house a month later. I never slept there again after that night. But sometimes, even now in my new apartment, I catch myself listening, straining to hear any sound from above, any creak of floorboards, any whisper of breath. Because now I know the truth. You are never really alone in an old house, and sometimes the things that live in the spaces between walls and above ceilings are far worse than anything you could imagine. The summer I turned 23, I house sat for my aunt while she traveled through Europe. Her house was beautiful, a modern split level with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking a wooded backyard. The back wall of the living room was entirely glass, a silding door that led to a wooden deck, and then the forest beyond. During the day, those windows were stunning. Sunlight poured through, illuminating every corner of the house. But at night, they became something else entirely. Black mirrors reflecting the interior of the room back at me, while hiding whatever might be watching from the darkness outside. My aunt had warned me about this before she left. She told me to close the blinds after sunset. She sold the darkness, played tricks on the eyes, made you see things that were not there. I thought she was being paranoid. I was wrong. The first few nights, I followed her advice. I closed the blinds before dark and kept the house locked up tight. But after a week, I started to get comfortable. Started to feel silly for being so cautious. One evening, I was cooking dinner and lost track of time. By the time I finished eating, it was fully dark outside, and I had forgotten all about the blinds. I was washing dishes at the kitchen sink when I first saw it. A reflection in the window above the sink. A shape in the living room behind me. Standing near the glass door. Teaspoon around my heart, lurching into my throat. There was nothing there. Just the empty living room. The furniture casting long shadows in the lamplight, and beyond the glass, the impenetrable darkness of the woods. I stood there for a long moment, trying to calm my racing heart, my imagination. Primera told myself just my imagination. I turned back to the sink and finished the dishes, forcing myself not to look at the window again, but I could not shake the feeling that something was watching me. I dried my hands and walked into the living room, intending to finally close those blinds. As I approached the glass door, Primera slowed down. Through the reflection of the room, I could see the deck beyond. The wooden chairs, the potted plants my aunt had asked me to water. And at the very edge of the deck, where the light from the house barely reached, I saw something else. A figure. It was standing at the tree line, maybe 30 feet from the house. Tal and thin, perfectly still, watching. I could not make out any features. Just a dark silhouette against the darker trees behind it. I froze. My hand hovered over the blind's cord, unable to move. I stared at that figure, wanting for it to do something. Move. Disappear. Reveal itself as a shadow or a trick of the light. It did not move, for what felt like hours, but was probably only seconds. We stayed like that. Me inside the house, bathed in lamplight, completely visible through the glass. That figure outside, hidden by darkness, watching. Then it took a step forward. Blinds closed so fast I nearly pulled them off the track. My hands were shaking, my breath sharp gasps. I backed away from the windows, my eyes fixed on those closed blinds, Halfie a hand pressed against the glass from outside. Pinned, I grabbed my phone and called the police. They sent a car out, and 2 officers searched the property with flashlights. They found nothing, no footprints, no signs that anyone had been there. One of them suggested it might have been a deer. The other said maybe a neighbor taking a walk. I did not believe either of them. That night, I slept with every light in the house on and a kitchen knife under my pillow. I did not close my eyes until the sun came up. The next evening, I closed the blinds before sunset. I triple-checked all the locks. I kept the television on for Knowles and company. I told myself I was safe. I told myself it had been nothing. Around midnight, I heard something on the deck. A soft thump, like a footstep on wood. Then another, moving slowly across the deck, approaching the glass door. I sat on the couch, paralyzed, staring at the closed blinds. The footsteps stopped. Silence stretched out, thick and suffocating. Then I heard breathing. It was coming from just on the other side of the glass. Heavy, deliberate breathing, fogging against the window. I could hear it through the thin pane, through the flimsy barrier of the blinds. Someone was standing inches away from me, separated only by a sheet of glass. I did not move. I did not breathe. I sat there in the harsh light of the living room, listening to that breathing, knowing that whoever was outside could probably see my silhouette through the blinds just as clearly as I could hear them. Then the handle rattled. Someone was trying to open the sliding door. I screamed. I do not remember deciding to scream. It just happened. The ratting stopped. The breathing stopped. I heard footsteps again, moving quickly this time, retreating across the deck and into the woods. I called my aunt that night and told her I could not stay in her house anymore. I made up an excuse about a family emergency. I packed my bags and left before dawn, driving 3 hours back to my own apartment in the city. I never told her what really happened. What could I say? That something came out of the woods and tried to get into her house, that it stood on a deck, breathing against her windows, trying her door handle while I cowered inside. She came back from her trip a month later. She never mentioned anything strange about the house. No signs of break-ins. No evidence that anyone had been there. Maybe whatever I saw gave up after I left. Maybe it was never real to begin with. But sometimes, late at night in my own apartment, I find myself checking the windows, making sure the blinds are closed, the locks are secure, and I never, ever leave my lights on after dark. Because I learned something that summer, something I will never forget. Glass doors might keep out the cold and the rain, but they do not keep out the things that watch from the darkness. They just give those things a better view. I was 12 years old the night my grandmother died. Not in the same house as me, not even in the same state. She passed away peacefully in a hospital bed 300 miles away while I slept in my bedroom, unaware that anything was wrong. But something new, something came to tell me. My parents had driven to be with her when she got sick, leaving me with my older brother Marcus, who was 17 at the time. He was supposed to be responsible, but the moment our parents left, he invited his girlfriend over and disappeared into his room. I was on my own. I did not mind at first. I liked having the house to myself. I stayed up late, watching television, ate ice cream for dinner, and enjoyed the freedom of being unsupervised. Around 11, I finally went upstairs to bed, leaving Marcus and his girlfriend in his room at the other end of the hall. Our house was a simple, 2-story, colonial. Downstairs was the living room, kitchen, and dining room. Upstairs were 4 bedrooms and a bathroom, all connected by a long hallway. My room was at the front of the house, overlooking the street. My parents' room was at the back. Marcus was in between, and the 4th bedroom was used for storage. I fell asleep quickly that night, but around 3 in the morning, I woke up suddenly, my heart pounding for no reason I could identify. The house was completely silent. No sounds from Marcus's room. No cars on the street outside. Just thick, heavy silence that seemed to press against my ears. Then I heard footsteps. They were coming from downstairs. Slow, deliberate footsteps, crossing the living room floor. I told myself it was Marcus, getting a drink of water or a midnight snack. I pulled the covers up to my chin and listened. The footsteps reached the bottom of the stairs. They paused there for a long moment. Then they began to climb. Step. 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 Each footfall was heavy and measured, like someone who was in no hurry at all. Someone who knew exactly where they were going. I lay in my bed, frozen, listening to those footsteps ascend to the stairs. They reached the top. They turned into the hallway, coming toward my room. I wanted to call out for Marcus. I wanted to scream, but my voice was locked in my throat, trapped by a fear I could not explain. I just lay there, staring at my bedroom door, watching the thin strip of light from the hallway under the gap at the bottom. The footsteps stopped outside my door. I saw a shadow pass across that strip of light. Something was standing just outside, blocking the hallway light. I held my breath. My entire body was rigid with terror. Then, slowly, my door began to open. It swung inward, inch by inch, revealing the dark hallway beyond. I could not see anyone standing there. The doorway appeared empty, but I knew something was there. I could feel it. The door stopped when it was halfway open. For a long moment, nothing happened. Then I saw a movement in the darkness. A shape, barely visible, stepping into my room. It was the outline of a person, but wrong somehow. Too tall. Too thin. Moving with a strange, gliding motion that did not look like walking. It approached my bed. I squeezed my eyes shut. I could not look anymore. I pulled the covers over my head and curled into a ball, making myself as small as possible. I heard. Breathing now. Soft, rasping, breathing that seemed to come from everywhere at once. Something touched my blanket. A hand, pressing down on the covers just above my shoulder. Light pressure, almost gentle, like someone reaching out to comfort a frightened child. Then I felt breath on my ear, warm and close, even through the fabric of my blanket. And I heard a voice. It was my grandmother's voice, weak and distant, like she was speaking from very far away, but unmistakably her. She said my name. She told me she loved me. She told me not to be afraid. Then the pressure lifted. The breathing stopped. I heard footsteps again, moving away from my bed, out my door, down the hallway. They descended the stairs, crossed the living room, and faded into silence. I did not move until morning. I did not sleep. I just lay there under my blanket, trembling, replaying those words over and over in my mind. When the sun finally came up, I ran to Marcus's room and woke him up. I told him everything. He looked at me like I was crazy. He said I had been dreaming, that I had imagined the whole thing. I almost believed him. Then the phone rang. It was our parents, calling to tell us that Grandma had passed away during the night. The hospital sold. She died around 3 in the morning. The exact time I heard those footsteps on the stairs. I never told anyone the full story. Not my parents, not Marcus, not anyone. How could I explain that my grandmother came to say goodbye? That something wearing a voice walked through my house and touched my blanket and whispered in my ear. Part of me wants to believe it was really her. That in her final moments, she found a way to reach across the miles and let me know she was leaving. That her last act on earth was to comfort her frightened grandchild. But another part of me is not so sure. Because the thing that came into my room that night did not feel like my grandmother. It did not feel warm or loving or safe. It felt wrong. It felt like something wearing a mask. Something pretending to be someone it was not. And sometimes I wonder if I had opened my eyes that night. If I had looked at whatever was standing beside my bed. Would I have seen my grandmother's face? Or would I have seen something else entirely? I am 31 years old now. I have lived alone for years. In apartments and houses, in cities and small towns. I have never again experienced anything like what happened that night. But I have never forgotten it, and every time I hear footsteps when I am supposed to be alone, every time a door opens when it should be closed, I remember those words whispered through my blanket. Do not be afraid. But I am. I am always afraid, because I know now that there are things in this world that come in the night. Things that climb stairs and open doors and stand beside your bed while you sleep. And sometimes they sound like the people you love, but that does not mean they are. The key to my grandpa's cabin was still on the same old ring he kept on his belt, except now it was in a padded envelope with my name on it and a sticky note from my aunt. Hope you can do something with the place. I almost didn't come, not because I was scared of the woods, but because I was scared of the feelings. The cabin had been sitting empty for 2 years, and sitting is how places die. So I took 3 days off, packed my truck, and headed out with the kind of optimism you only have before you arrive. The driveway was just 2 muddy ruts now, with grass tall enough to slap my door handles. I had to get out twice to move fallen branches. When I finally saw the cabin, it looked like it had been turned down to low brightness. Faded siding, dark windows, a sagging porch, and behind it, the lake. It sat there, looking calm, while it swallowed every sound. No motorboats, no kids, just water and wind. I killed the engine and listened. A loon called out, that long, hollow sound that makes your stomach tighten. Inside, the cabin smelled like cold wood, dust, and old cedar. My grandma used to tuck cedar blocks in the drawers. The furniture was covered in sheets, but the layout was the same. Grandpa's fishing rods were still leaning by the back door, their lines slack. I got practical to avoid the memories, opening windows and checking for damage. There was no power, which my aunt had mentioned like it was no big deal. Fine. I had lanterns. I walked down to the shore. The dock was in pieces. The far end dipped into the dark water. The lake was deep. You could see a foot down, and then it just went black. On the wet sand, I saw something that didn't fit. 2 long, parallel drag marks, like something had pulled itself out of the water and then slid back in. I told myself it was a big snapping turtle. People always underestimate those things. I spent the afternoon fixing the porch, patching the screen, and clearing gutters. Work makes you feel like you're in control. Around sunset, I sat on the new porch boards and watched the lake go flat, mirroring the bruised purple sky. That's when the noises started. First, a wet slap near the dock, heavier than a fish jumping. I leaned forward. Nothing broke the surface. A minute later, I heard it again. Slap. Then a dragging sound, like something rough being pulled over stones. I grabbed my headlamp and shined it down toward the shore. Nothing. The air got colder fast. I went inside and latched the door, more out of habit than fear. Around 11:30, I was half asleep on the couch when the porch creaked. One slow, heavy groan. This was weight, then a soft tapping near the screen door. Tap. 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 Not random, like wet knuckles. I turned the lantern down, clicked on my headlamp, and crept to the window. The porch was empty, but right in front of the screen door was a wet streak, a smear of lake water and mud glistening in my headlamp, and a smell. Fish, whetstone, and a sharp metallic edge. The scraping started again, right on the screen door, like a nail on mesh. I stepped back, bumping a chair. The scraping stopped instantly. Then, from down near the dock, another wet slap. I didn't sleep much after that. Sometime after 2 in the morning, I heard a low, smooth drag along the side of the cabin. It stopped under the kitchen window. Then a sound that made my stomach turn. A soft, fast, rhythmic clicking, like a throat trying to make words and failing. Morning came gray and cold. The wet streak on the porch had dried to a faint crust. Near the steps, in the mud, were impressions like the edge of a shovel, pressed in a repeating pattern. That day, I found an old tackle box under the porch. Inside was a folded, yellowed note from my grandpa. Don't go down to the inlet at night. Don't leave the fish on the porch. If you hear it clicking, come inside. My grandpa wasn't a man who wrote spooky warnings. This was serious. That afternoon, I drove to town and bought 2 motion lights and a heavy-duty door bar. The guy at the hardware store asked if I was at the lake cabins. He said, "Watch the water line. It's been weird." Then he added, "Probably just a big snapping turtle." He smiled. I didn't. That night, I set up the lights and barred the door. A hatchet was within arm's reach. At 10:47, the porch motion light clicked on. The porch looked empty. The light went off. 10 on again. 10 to 8. Side yard light clicked on too. It felt like something was testing the angles, staying just out of range. Then the porch light clicked on and stayed on. I looked through the window. The screen door was bowed inward, like something was pressed against it. A shape moved. It slid forward and lifted its head into the light. My first thought was lasered, but that's too simple. It was the size of a large dog, low to the ground, with dark, ridged skin that shone wet. Pale, translucent frills along its neck fluttered. Its head was broad and flat, with a mouth that was too wide. It stared through the screen as if it understood doors. Then it clicked. That fast, wet sound. I stepped back. The floor creaked, and its head snapped toward me. It surged forward, hitting the screen with a heavy thump. The frame rattled. I backed into the kitchen, my phone showing 2 bars of service. Instead of calling for help, I did the stupidest thing. I grabbed the hatchet, unlocked the door, and told myself, just scare it off. The moment I cracked the door, the smell hit me. The porch was empty. The motion light lit up, nothing but wet streaks. I stepped out anyway. Then I heard it, from under the porch. A sliding sound. I swung my headlamp toward the shore and saw it rise from the shallows, water sheeting off its back. It exploded forward, hitting the porch steps and coming up fast. I swung the hatchet, pure reflex. The blade glanced off its shoulder with a hard clack. It snapped at me, jaws opening wider than they should, and clamped onto my forearm. Pain detonated, hot and immediate. I screamed and slammed the hatchet handle into its head. It released with a wet pop and jerked back, clicking rapidly. It lunged again. I stumbled backward off the porch, falling hard. My headlamp beam went wild. Before I could get up, it raked its blunt nails across my ribs, tearing my shirt, the shallow cuts burning instantly. I kicked, connecting with its jaw. It bit my boot and yanked, twisting my ankle. A bright, sick pain shot up my leg. It released my boot and tilted its head, deciding where to bite next. I grabbed a fistful of gravel and threw it at its eyes. It flinched. Just enough. I crawled backward, dragging my bad leg, and hauled myself up the steps, hands slipping on wet boards. I slammed the door and locked it. The creature hit the screen once, hard. Then, silence. The porch light clicked off. I didn't wait. I grabbed my keys and phone and staggered out the front door toward my truck. The yard felt huge. Behind me, I heard the wet, sliding sound again. Following, I got the truck started, headlights washing the cabin in white. The porch motion light clicked on, and there it was, crouched on the steps, watching my truck like it was memorizing its shape. It didn't charge. It just watched. I reversed hard and drove until I hit pavement. That's when I noticed the smell was in my truck with me. Fish and whetstone. On the floor, mat was a dark smear, and embedded in it was a small, oval, ridged scale, the size of my thumbnail. At origin Takade. I just said I was bitten by an animal. As the nurse cleaned the bite on my arm, she paused. "What is that?" She used forceps and pinched something out of the wound, dropping it into a metal tray. It wasn't gravel. It was a tiny black sliver of something sharp and pointed, like the tip of a tooth. The nurse just stared at it, and I knew, without a doubt, that whatever was at that lake, it wasn't a turtle, and it was still there. Waiting. Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed this story, be sure to like and subscribe for more.